I gave them everything, my time, my money, my life. I worked so they could have a future. And when I needed them the most, they said I was a burden. In the house I paid for, the people I raised, turned away. It was a Tuesday morning, quiet, harmless. The kind of morning where the sun spills gently across the kitchen floor and birds sing as if nothing terrible has ever happened. But that day, the sun felt like it was mocking me. It was too bright, too perfect, for the storm that was about to break inside me. I stood at the kitchen sink, gripping a chipped white mug that said "World's Best Mom." I had received it nearly 20 years ago when my children were little, laughing, full of gratitude. That mug had once been a symbol of love. Now, it felt heavy, like it carried every ounce of disappointment, every tear I'd hidden, every moment of sacrifice that had gone unnoticed. From the living room, I heard their voices low, careful, as if they were tiptoeing around the truth that would crush me. "She's up already," my daughter said. A pause. "She doesn't sleep much anymore," my son replied. They weren't talking to me. They were talking about me. My chest tightened, but I told myself not to panic. Mothers learn to survive on excuses. We invent patience like we invent recipes, out of necessity, love, and a little denial. I rinsed my mug, drying it slowly, feeling the weight of the words in my bones. "We can't keep doing this," my daughter continued. "It's too much, too much." I leaned against the counter, grateful for the support of it, though it did nothing to steady the ache in my stomach. "She needs help," my son said. "Like, real help." Another pause. A quiet sentence that would echo in my mind for weeks. "And we can't be that help anymore." I froze. I had raised these children with my own hands. I had held them through fevers, wiped their tears, stayed up nights when nightmares terrified them. I had skipped meals so they could eat seconds. I had worked double shifts, ignored my own pain, buried my dreams so theirs could bloom. And now, I was too much. I didn't walk into the living room. Something inside told me if I did, I would scream. I might cry. I might shake with grief and rage all at once. So I stayed in the kitchen, pretending to check the cupboard, pretending not to hear the words that were reshaping my life. "We should start looking at options," my daughter said finally. "Places. You know, places." I remembered the small blue house I bought years ago after my husband died. I had signed the papers with trembling hands, telling myself it was for them, for stability, for security. The nights I spent worrying about tuition, bills, food, they never saw the cost of my sacrifices. But I remembered every sleepless night, every penny I had scrimped to save for their futures. And now it seemed it had all been nothing. I didn't cry yet. Mothers learn patience early. We store the pain quietly, waiting for the right moment or the wrong one to release it. Later that afternoon, my daughter knocked on my bedroom door. Her voice was soft, hesitant. "Mom," she said. I opened the door with a practiced smile, the kind that says, "I'm fine. Don't worry." She didn't smile back. "We need to talk," she said, sitting on the edge of my bed. My son hovered in the doorway, avoiding my gaze. He used to run to me when he was scared. Now he couldn't even look at me. "We've been thinking," my daughter began, "about what's best for everyone." "Everyone? Not me. You know we love you," she said quickly, almost like a disclaimer before bad news. "But things are different now." Different. I waited. Mothers learn patience early. She sighed. "You forget things sometimes. You need help. And with work, the kids, everything, it's just not realistic for you to stay here. Stay here." My house. The one I bought with sweat, tears, and a heart full of hope. The one I welcomed them into when life hit them hard. My home had always been theirs as much as mine. And now, I was being told it wasn't mine anymore. My son finally spoke. "It's not personal, Mom." That's when something inside me cracked. Because it was personal. It was my life, my home, my worth. "What are you saying?" I asked quietly. They exchanged a look, the kind people give when they've already decided your fate. "There's a place," my daughter said. "Nice, clean, professionals, other people your age. A place." I nodded slowly, even as my heart screamed inside my chest. "When?" I asked. "Soon," she replied. "It's for the best." "For who?" That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house breathe around me. This house had heard laughter, arguments, birthdays, Christmas mornings. And now it was listening to my heartbreak. I realized then that I wasn't being moved because I was old. I was being moved because I was inconvenient. I turned my head toward the window and whispered the truth I had been avoiding. They don't need me anymore. The next morning, the car ride to the place they had chosen was quiet. I sat in the back, staring out the window, trying to memorize every familiar street before it disappeared from my life. My daughter drove. My son sat stiffly beside her, and I sat silently, letting the world slip by. The building was large, clean, and sterile. Too sterile. Polished floors reflected fluorescent lights, and the walls were painted in neutral colors that seemed to suck warmth out of the air. A woman in a crisp uniform greeted us. "Mrs. Carter? Welcome." Her smile was polite, but empty. I didn't feel welcome. "This is it?" I asked quietly. "Yes," my daughter said. "It's very nice, Mom. You'll have everything you need here." I wanted to laugh. Everything I need? I had given them everything for decades. This was my reward? They led me down a long hallway lined with identical doors. My room was simple. A bed, a chair, a small dresser. I sat on the bed, feeling the springs beneath me like the first cracks of a long fracture in my heart. They kissed me, smiled, and said, "We love you. This is for the best." And then they were gone. Alone. I wandered the halls, feeling like a ghost. Residents smiled politely, but their eyes didn't see me. I spoke to one man, sitting in a recliner with a newspaper. "Hi, I'm Alice," I said. He looked up, nodded faintly. "Welcome. New here?" "Yes," I replied. "I just arrived." He smiled politely, but that was all. The first sparks of anger. That night, lying in the assigned bed, I realized I had been stripped of everything. My home, my children, my sense of belonging. But then, a spark. A small, quiet, stubborn spark of anger. I would not let this define me. I would not let them or this place decide my worth. I started observing everything. The routines, the staff, the residents. I noticed patterns, weaknesses, small cracks in the system. They didn't see me as a threat. They never had to. And that was when I decided I could reclaim my life. It wouldn't be easy, but the fire inside me was growing. I closed my eyes and whispered into the dark, "This isn't the end. Not for me. Not yet." The first night in the facility was harder than I could have imagined. The silence was suffocating, and not the comforting kind of silence that lets you think. This silence had weight, as if it pressed down on my chest and whispered, "You don't belong here." I lay in the small, sterile bed, staring at the ceiling. The hum of fluorescent lights above reminded me that this was not my home, not the home I had built, decorated, filled with laughter, with arguments, with memories of holidays and birthdays. No, this was a place designed to be neat, efficient, and utterly forgettable. I tried to imagine myself as one of the residents here, the elderly women and men who walked the halls with careful steps, nodding politely to each other, their conversations shallow, safe. I realized painfully that some of them had been here for months, years even, and that the staff knew them as case numbers, routines, schedules, not as people. And that's when I felt it clearly, the anger. The next morning, I walked the hallways. Every step echoed on the polished floor, reminding me of my own isolation. Residents greeted me with polite smiles. Some were too lost in their own routines to notice, some too wary to speak. I caught sight of a woman in a wheelchair, staring blankly at a mural on the wall, a painting of a sunny garden with birds and flowers. I recognized the longing in her eyes. She, too, had been displaced from a world she loved. I tried to start a conversation. "Beautiful, isn't it?" I asked, nodding toward the mural. She blinked, startled. Yes, it is," she murmured. Her voice was soft, almost timid. I realized then that in this place, words were rationed, conversations limited to safe topics, polite phrases, and nothing that might stir the past, the pain, or the desire for freedom. Breakfast was served promptly at a.m. in a large communal dining room. The tables were neatly arranged, chairs tucked in at precise intervals. The smell of eggs and toast filled the air, but there was no warmth. People ate quietly, carefully, like they were performing a ritual rather than satisfying hunger. I sat at a table near the window, trying to remember what home smelled like, what laughter sounded like, what a family should feel like. The staff were efficient. They checked vitals, reminded people to take medications, helped with mobility. Their kindness was professional, controlled, and distant. I noticed the way they moved, the way they spoke, not cruel but indifferent. They had been trained to manage, not to care. And in that moment, I realized how easy it would be for someone like me to fade into the background, unnoticed, unremarked upon, unmissed. By mid-morning, I started exploring. The facility had a library, a small gym, a garden courtyard. I wandered into the library first. Rows of books stood neatly on shelves, organized by author, genre, and age. I picked up a novel I had loved years ago, a story of resilience and hope. As I held it in my hand, I felt a flicker of strength, a reminder that even here, surrounded by walls that were meant to cage me, I could still reach for something that belonged to me. In the courtyard, I saw residents walking in circles, some with walkers, some with canes. I recognized the resignation in their posture, the quiet acceptance of routines imposed by others. And I realized I didn't want to accept it. Not yet. Not ever. The days blurred together. I attended activities that felt designed to distract rather than engage. Arts and crafts, sing-alongs, bingo. The staff smiled and encouraged participation, but the energy was hollow. I sat through each activity, observing, learning, and planning. I began to notice patterns. The staff changed shifts at the same time each day. Meals arrived at the same time. Certain doors were never locked. Certain corridors were unattended for minutes at a time. And then it hit me. I could leave. At first, the thought seemed impossible. Who would allow an old woman to walk out of a facility designed to manage her? But the more I watched, the more I realized the truth. The staff were polite but not vigilant. My children had already decided I was a burden. They weren't coming back. If I wanted freedom, I would have to take it for myself. I began testing the boundaries. I asked questions I didn't really need answers to. I lingered near doors. I observed the routines of the staff. I learned which residents were friendly, which were wary, which could be allies. And I began quietly asserting myself. A small refusal here, a polite correction there. Nothing overt, but enough to make my presence felt. One afternoon, while the staff were busy in the cafeteria preparing lunch, I approached a resident I had noticed several times before, a man named Harold. He had a sharp mind, though his body had begun to betray him. "You know," I said quietly, "this place isn't as safe as they want you to believe." He looked at me, curiosity flickering in his eyes. "What do you mean?" "They watch you, yes," I said, "but they don't care about you. Not really. You can do more than you think. You just have to try." He frowned, unsure. "Try? What do you mean?" "I mean, they want compliance, routine, predictable behavior. But we're not children. We don't have to accept it." That night, I lay in my bed, thinking about what I could do. I had been placed here to be managed, contained, forgotten. But I was not finished. Not yet. I still had my mind, my will, and my strength. I could plan. I could wait. I could act. And I would. The days passed, each one a test of patience and cunning. I learned the schedules of the staff, the habits of the residents. I began small acts of rebellion, moving to different tables at meals, questioning instructions politely but firmly, reclaiming small spaces for myself. Each act was minor, but each act reminded me that I still existed, that I still had control over something, no matter how small. By the end of the first week, I had allies, residents who had noticed my presence, my determination, my refusal to fade into silence. They were cautious, wary of repercussions, but they watched, listened, and began to understand that change was possible. That even in a place designed to erase individuality, we could still assert our existence. One evening, as I walked the halls, I overheard two staff members discussing me. "She's different," one said. "Yes," the other replied. "She doesn't follow the routine. She asks questions. She's challenging." A thrill ran through me. I was visible. I mattered. Even here, even now, I could make them see me, acknowledge me, or fear me. That night, I lay awake planning. If they wanted me to be compliant, to be quiet, to be forgotten, they were mistaken. I would reclaim my life piece by piece. I would prove to myself and perhaps even to my children that I was not a burden. I was a force. Over the following weeks, my confidence grew. I became more deliberate in my movements, more strategic in my conversations, more aware of the opportunities around me. I learned the weaknesses of the routines, the times when doors were unlocked, when staff were distracted, when residents were willing to help. I began to plot not a rash escape, but a careful, deliberate reclaiming of freedom. I had given my children everything, but now it was time to give myself something: dignity, control, and the knowledge that I was more than what they had decided I was. And then came the first real test. A minor mishap in the schedule, a staff shortage, a door left slightly ajar. I watched, calculated, and moved. For the first time, I felt the exhilaration of agency, the thrill of taking control. It was a small victory, but it was mine. The residents who had been wary now watched me with interest. Harold, the man in the library, nodded approvingly. Others began to speak quietly, sharing their own frustrations, their own ideas, their own longing for agency. A small community began to form, not of rebellion for its own sake, but of shared humanity. And I realized something vital. I was not alone. Not in spirit, not in will, not in purpose. There were others here, like me, who had been placed, confined, overlooked, and underestimated. Together, we could challenge the assumptions of this place. Together, we could reclaim our lives, piece by piece, act by act, moment by moment. By the end of the month, I had a plan not fully formed, not foolproof, but alive. A plan to assert my independence, to reclaim my dignity, to prove to my children and to myself that I was not a burden, that I was a human being with value, purpose, and strength. I had been placed here to be forgotten. Instead, I had begun to rise, and the fire inside me burned brighter than ever. The morning light crept through the blinds, casting soft stripes across the bed I had slowly begun to think of as my own corner of this sterile world. But make no mistake, this was not home. Not yet. Home had laughter, arguments, the smell of coffee and warm bread, memories embedded in every corner. Here, it was clean, efficient, orderly, but cold. I had been here for a few weeks now. Weeks in which I observed, waited, and learned. I had memorized the routines, the schedules, the little habits of the staff and residents. I had discovered the cracks in their system. I had found allies among the residents, timid at first, curious, then cautiously trusting. And most importantly, I had begun to reclaim something I had lost long before my children decided I was a burden: my voice. Breakfast was served at exactly 8. Today, I walked into the dining hall with a new confidence. My shoulders straight, my chin up. No longer willing to be invisible, I chose a table near the window. Harold, the man I had befriended in the library, sat waiting. A small smile crept across his face. Others followed my gaze, curious, noting that I had begun to assert a presence. "You look different," Harold said quietly as I sat down. "I feel different," I whispered back. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't rebellion for rebellion's sake. It was a determination to reclaim what was mine: my dignity, my life, my self-respect. Over toast and eggs, I began small conversations, gently challenging the monotony imposed on us. "Do they let you choose your meals?" I asked one of the women across the table. She shrugged. "Sometimes." "Well," I said carefully, "why not ask for what you like more often? Why accept what's given without question?" Her eyes widened. I never thought of that." Small ripples began to spread. In a place designed for compliance, a single act of assertion can be revolutionary. I started subtly but deliberately. I rearranged my chair to face the garden instead of the television during group activities. I chose the books I wanted from the library instead of the ones suggested by staff. I refused to attend one morning exercise, opting to walk the courtyard alone instead. Each act was minor, but in a place built for obedience, it was noticed. And I noticed that notice, in turn, gave me power. Staff whispered about me. Residents watched. I became a presence impossible to ignore. And with that visibility came the first taste of influence. I spoke quietly to Harold, who had begun to test the boundaries himself, inspired by my small, persistent acts. They won't stop us if we're careful, I said, but they will try to make us think we're powerless. That's the trick. Harold nodded slowly. Powerless? No, just cautious. And afraid. Yes, I said, but that's something we can use. Fear can be controlled, if you understand it. By the end of the day, I had begun to form a subtle network. Residents whispered quietly, sharing small victories, ideas, ways to assert themselves without attracting overt reprimands. I realized something crucial. Strength is contagious. A single determined person can inspire others, and I had become that spark. The staff, of course, noticed. A nurse approached me one afternoon as I was rearranging my chair in the common room to face the sunlight. Mrs. Carter, she said carefully, we prefer if everyone follows the seating arrangement. I looked up slowly. I prefer sunlight, I replied softly, firmly. It helps with my mood. The nurse blinked, taken aback by my calm defiance. She nodded. I understand, and walked away. I smiled inwardly. Small victories, yes, but powerful. They tested my resolve, and I passed. Over the next few days, I became bolder. I chose my own schedule, took long walks when exercise periods were assigned, and engaged residents in private conversations about the routines, the rules, and how they could assert themselves. We were not plotting chaos, but reclaiming autonomy. I noticed that the staff responded inconsistently. Some tried gentle corrections, others ignored me, and a few, quietly, seemed impressed by my persistence. They didn't know it yet, but I had begun to understand the delicate balance of control, of negotiation, of subtle manipulation. By the second week, I had allies. Small, hesitant, but growing. Harold, Mrs. Jennings, the woman I had spoken to at breakfast, and a few others who had once seemed invisible, now began to show life. We shared whispered strategies. If they leave the doors unlocked at this time, I said, we can explore the courtyard unsupervised. We can take walks where no one notices. Harold nodded, excitement flickering. I never thought of it that way. We could take back some of our time, some of our freedom. Mrs. Jennings's eyes shone with cautious hope. I forgot I could choose anything. For so long, I've been following their rules like I had no say. Yes, I said softly but firmly. You do, and so do I. We all do, and it's time we remembered that. The residents began testing boundaries themselves, encouraged by the subtle rebellion. One day, a man refused to take his scheduled nap. Another chose his own book in the library rather than the one assigned by staff. And each time, I smiled quietly, knowing that our quiet revolution was growing. Of course, not everyone supported us. Some residents whispered that I was reckless, that I would bring trouble. And one afternoon, I faced the first real confrontation with authority. A staff supervisor approached me as I was guiding Harold through the library stacks. Mrs. Carter, she said, voice firm, we need to follow the rules here. You cannot wander without supervision. I held her gaze. I'm not wandering. I am walking, and I am not breaking any rules that harm others. I am exercising my right to move freely in a place that claims to care for me. She frowned, clearly unprepared for the calm, articulate defiance. We will discuss this later. And she left, frustrated. I had survived the first confrontation without punishment, and it gave me confidence. I realized that the staff's authority was only as strong as my willingness to obey it. And I did not. That night, lying in my bed, I thought about my children, how easily they had written me off, how quickly they had decided I was a burden. It stung like fire, but it also fueled me. If they thought they could define my worth, they were wrong. If this facility thought it could cage me, they were wrong. I was not finished, not by a long shot. I reflected on my life, the years of giving, the sacrifices, the quiet resilience. Every sleepless night, every hardship endured, every moment I had put them first, they had created the woman I was now. Strong, determined, unyielding. And now, I would reclaim the life I had been denied piece by piece. I began mapping routines, noting weaknesses, identifying allies. Each corridor, each door, each staff shift became a piece of the puzzle. I kept a quiet journal in my mind. Every observation, every small victory, every rule I could challenge. One afternoon, Harold approached me. "Alice, are you really planning to?" His voice trailed off. "Yes," I said, quietly but decisively. "I'm planning to reclaim what is mine. Not in anger, not in malice, but in justice. Freedom is not given, it is taken, and I intend to take it." He nodded, a mixture of fear and admiration in his eyes. I want to help." And so, our small group began to form more intentionally. Together, we were learning the language of quiet rebellion, of subtle assertion, of reclaiming agency in a world designed to remove it. By the end of the third week, something remarkable happened. Residents who had been silent, who had been resigned to routines and compliance, began to speak up. They began choosing, deciding, asserting small acts of self-determination. I saw it in their eyes, in their posture, in the way they walked a little taller, spoke a little louder, smiled a little brighter. I realized then that what I had thought was impossible change in this place was possible. Not overnight, not without effort, but possible. And with that hope came a dangerous realization. I could go further. I could challenge the rules more boldly, test the staff more strategically, reclaim not only my dignity but a sense of power in a place designed to strip it away. The fire inside me was no longer a flicker. It was a blaze. And so, one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the polished floors, I gathered my small group, Harold, Mrs. Jennings, and a few others who had begun to trust me. "We're going to take back more than just small freedoms," I whispered. "We're going to reclaim our lives. And nothing, no rule, no staff member, no child who abandoned us will stop us." The air was thick with anticipation, fear, and hope. I looked at them, my allies, and I knew the next move would change everything. Because this was no longer about compliance. This was about survival. This was about power. This was about reclaiming life itself. The morning began like any other, though by now, I knew that nothing here would ever feel ordinary again. My plan had been brewing for weeks, careful, deliberate, tested in whispers and small victories. Today, I would escalate, not recklessly, but strategically. The time had come to prove that I was no longer a passive resident, no longer someone to be managed or dismissed. Harold, Mrs. Jennings, and the others I had begun to trust gathered quietly in the common room before breakfast. Our group was small, cautious, but united. I looked at them eyes wide, some nervous, some excited, and I felt a surge of pride. "We were ready. Today," I said quietly, "we take control, not to cause trouble, but to reclaim what is ours. Our time, our choices, our dignity. And if we are careful, we will show them that we cannot be ignored." The nods, the quiet murmurs of agreement, gave me strength. Even in a place designed to erase individuality, we had begun to assert our existence. Breakfast was served promptly, as always. Staff hovered around, checking trays, reminding residents to sit, monitoring who ate what. I walked in confidently, my allies following, and chose the table we had designated as our command center. A staff supervisor approached. "Mrs. Carter, please sit at the assigned table," she said, her voice clipped but controlled. "I'd rather sit here," I replied calmly, meeting her gaze. "It's closer to the window, and I enjoy the sunlight." Her frown deepened, but she did nothing more than glance at the others and walk away. Small victory. I had learned quickly that authority relies on compliance. If we refused quietly but firmly, they could not punish us without creating a scene. And in a place so structured, a scene would disrupt the routine. Harold whispered, "You really think they'll let you get away with this?" "They'll have to," I replied. "Not because they want to, but because I refuse to be invisible." Over the next few hours, we began testing boundaries. We walked where we weren't supposed to, engaged in conversations during quiet time, refused scheduled naps. Each act was calculated, measured, never reckless, but enough to demonstrate autonomy. Steph noticed, of course. One nurse approached me in the library as I guided Mrs. Jennings to a shelf of books she preferred over the assigned reading. "Mrs. Carter, this is not permitted," she said, trying to sound authoritative. I looked at her calmly. "I'm choosing what I read. No one is being harmed. No rules are being broken that matter." Her frown faltered, and she walked away. Each minor victory emboldened us. Each act of defiance strengthened our resolve. And the residents began to follow. I could see it in their eyes, the spark of rebellion, the taste of autonomy. We were no longer passive. We were asserting our presence. That afternoon, my thoughts turned to my children, the ones who had abandoned me, who had decided I was a burden. I felt the old ache, sharp and raw, but now it was tempered by anger and clarity. I realized that they had underestimated me, assumed I would accept their judgment, accept their definition of my worth. They had thought they could decide the value of my life. And now, here, in a place designed to erase individuality, I was proving that they were wrong. I reached for the phone in the residence lounge. Dialing my daughter's number, I hesitated. My hands shook slightly. "Hello?" Her voice was warm, unaware, unprepared. "Do you remember me?" I asked softly. "I'm still here, still alive, still me." There was a pause. Then, "Mom?" Yes, I remember. How are you?" "I'm reclaiming my life," I said, voice steady. "Not with your permission, not with your approval, but I am. And I want you to understand what it means to dismiss someone, to call them a burden. You need to understand that some things like dignity cannot be taken from me without a fight." Silence. You sound different," she said finally, uncertainty in her tone. "I am different," I replied, "because I chose to be, because I refuse to be erased, because I refuse to be invisible." That evening, as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows through the halls, I began the first of what I called my strategic assertions. The doors to the main lounge were unlocked for a brief window while staff cleaned the cafeteria. We moved deliberately, quietly, but with confidence. Harold, Mrs. Jennings, and a few others followed my lead. We settled in the lounge, arranging chairs in a small circle. We spoke freely, shared thoughts, shared frustrations, and most importantly, shared strategies. For the first time, the facility felt like our space, not a cage, not a sterile routine, but a place we could inhabit on our own terms, if only briefly. When staff realized what we had done, they came rushing, but it was too late. We had claimed those moments, and in claiming them, we had asserted our right to autonomy. Over the next week, the ripple effects were undeniable. Other residents began joining our circle, quietly at first, then more openly. We organized small walks, chose activities we enjoyed, and resisted the imposed routines. Each small act was a victory, each act of defiance a reminder that we still had agency. The staff attempted to reassert control, but our careful, deliberate planning made it difficult. They could not punish us for asserting our humanity without creating disruptions. And we were clever enough to remain compliant in form, but independent in spirit. By the second week, the facility had begun to feel like something new, not just a place designed to contain us, but a place where we could reclaim a portion of our lives. Of course, they could not ignore us forever. The head of the facility requested a meeting with me. My allies and I were summoned to the administrative office. I walked in with my chin high, my steps steady, my resolve unshaken. "Mrs. Carter," the director began, voice controlled but sharp, "your behavior has caused disruptions. Residents and staff are unsettled. This must stop." "I am not disrupting," I said evenly. "I am asserting my right to autonomy, to dignity, to be treated as a human being, not a burden. I have lived my life giving to others, and I am not finished yet. I am entitled to choices, freedom, and respect." The director's expression hardened. "This is not about respect. This is about rules, safety, compliance." "Then you misunderstand," I said, eyes unwavering. "I am not here to break rules. I am here to live my life. You may manage schedules, but you cannot manage my will. You cannot dictate my worth. You cannot erase my humanity." A tense silence fell. I had made my position clear. I was not leaving. I was not yielding. And I would not be dismissed. After that meeting, I returned to my room and gathered my allies. Harold, Mrs. Jennings, and several others looked at me with wide eyes, inspired, emboldened. "We cannot stop here," I said quietly. "We must continue asserting our autonomy, not recklessly, but deliberately. Each small act matters. Each moment of resistance counts. Together, we can reclaim more than space. We can reclaim our lives." Their eyes shone with a mixture of fear and hope. "We're ready," Harold said. "Yes," I replied. "And remember, this is not revenge. It is life. It is freedom. And it is ours to claim." The fire within me burned brighter than ever. I had been written off by my children, dismissed by a system designed to erase me, underestimated by everyone who thought I was compliant. But I was not. And I would prove it, not with anger, but with strength, strategy, and relentless determination. That night, I sat alone in the lounge, reviewing the routines, the schedules, the weaknesses in the system. My plan for the next phase was daring, but it had to be. I would test the limits of authority, assert control, and prove once and for all that I was not a burden, not invisible, and not powerless. And as the last lights flickered off and the facility fell silent, I whispered to myself, "They think they can contain me. They think they can erase me. They are wrong. Tomorrow, everything changes. The next day would decide everything: our freedom, our dignity, and my place in the world." The morning sun filtered softly through the blinds, and for the first time since I had arrived at this place, it felt like the light was on my side. Weeks of careful observation, strategic defiance, and quiet planning had led to this moment. My allies and I were ready, not just to assert ourselves in small ways, but to reclaim our lives, our dignity, our freedom. I stood by the window, looking out at the courtyard. Harold was already there, pacing slightly, rehearsing what we would do. Mrs. Jennings, usually timid, stood tall, her hands on her hips. There was a determination in her eyes I had never seen before. The others shuffled behind us, hesitant but ready. We were no longer simply residents. We were a force. And today, we would prove it. Our plan had been simple in concept but precise in execution. We would assert control over the main common areas during the busiest hour, lunch. We would demonstrate, quietly but visibly, that we were not to be ignored, that our autonomy could not be erased. At exactly 12, we moved as one. I led the way to the dining hall, our group deliberate, confident. Staff looked up from their routines, expressions a mixture of surprise and mild alarm. I walked past them calmly. "We are claiming this space," I said softly, but firmly. "We are entitled to it." Harold and Mrs. Jennings flanked me, and the others spread out behind us. We took our positions, choosing tables near the windows, arranging chairs with purpose. Residents watched us, some joining quietly, inspired by the boldness of our actions. The room was alive, not chaotic, but charged. Every eye on us was a reminder that control could be challenged, that the rules of this place were not absolute. It didn't take long for staff to react. The head supervisor approached, her steps brisk, her expression tight. "Mrs. Carter," she called, voice authoritative. "You cannot do this. You must follow protocol. Everyone must comply." I looked at her calmly. "I am complying with respect for others. I am not harming anyone. But I will not be invisible. I will not accept being treated as a burden. And neither will these residents." Her face flushed, a mixture of frustration and incredulity. She waved for reinforcements, but I had anticipated this. Our group remained calm, composed, deliberate in our movements. We were unafraid because we were prepared. "I will not leave this space," I continued, voice steady. "And if anyone tries to force me, they will do so knowing they are challenging people who know their rights, their dignity, and their worth." The room fell silent. Staff hesitated, unsure of how to enforce rules against a group united, composed, and resolute. This was not rebellion without reason. This was reclamation with purpose. Over the next hour, negotiations, unspoken and subtle, took place. Staff realized that punishment or removal would cause disruption. The residents were no longer compliant. They had tasted freedom, however small, and they would not give it up. I spoke quietly to Harold and Mrs. Jennings. "We are winning, not because we are defiant, but because we are deliberate. Each action matters. Each assertion of control is a victory. We are reclaiming our lives moment by moment. By the time lunch ended, something remarkable had happened. The staff had not forcibly intervened. We had claimed the space, asserted our autonomy, and demonstrated that even in a place designed to erase individuality, human spirit and determination could not be contained. Residents approached me, some trembling with excitement, others with wide-eyed hope. "We can do this," Harold whispered. "We can take back more." "Yes," I replied, smiling. "We can, and we will." After the immediate confrontation, I knew it was time to confront the source of my deepest hurt. My children. I could no longer let them define my worth, but they needed to hear that I had risen, that I was alive, strong, and unbroken. I called my daughter first. She answered, tentative and sure. "Mom?" she said, her voice trembling. "Yes," I replied. "It's me. I want you to understand something. I am not a burden. I am alive, capable, and I will not be dismissed. And you who abandoned me need to see what it means to underestimate someone who has given everything and is still standing." There was silence. Then, a choked whisper. "Mom, you don't need to apologize," I said firmly. "But you do need to understand. I have reclaimed my life, and I will continue to live it on my terms. I am not waiting for permission. I am not asking for approval. I am asserting my right to exist fully, freely, and with dignity." I hung up, feeling the weight of decades of pain lift slightly. I was no longer waiting for them to validate me. I was validating myself. The next days were transformative. Our small group grew. Residents who had once been timid began speaking up. We shared books, organized walks, held conversations that mattered, reclaimed spaces that had been merely functional, and turned them into places alive with human presence. The staff, initially rigid, began to recognize that resistance did not mean chaos. It meant engagement, humanity, and spirit. Some softened their approach, listening more, guiding less. They saw that when residents were empowered, they were more cooperative, not because of coercion, but because they were treated as equals. I had not only reclaimed my own agency but had created a ripple effect, reminding everyone that even in a structured, controlled environment, the human spirit could flourish. Weeks turned into months. I had built a reputation, a presence, a life within these walls. My children, observing from afar, began to understand the mistake they had made. Visits became awkward at first. Apologies were offered, but I listened quietly. I did not need their validation. I had already validated myself. "I am proud of who I am," I whispered one evening to Harold and Mrs. Jennings. "Not because of them, but because I chose to reclaim my life. Not because they love me, but because I love me. Not because they stayed, but because I stood." Tears filled our eyes, not of sadness, but of triumph. We had taken a place designed to contain us and turned it into a space where dignity, choice, and human spirit were alive. By the time my story reached the residents beyond our immediate group, something extraordinary had happened. Staff approached us with respect rather than commands. Residents began choosing their routines, voicing preferences, asserting autonomy in ways they had thought impossible. I had not only reclaimed my life but had created a small revolution, a reminder that age, circumstance, or societal definitions cannot erase humanity, dignity, or purpose. And I realized something profound. Freedom is not always about leaving a place. Sometimes freedom is about reclaiming your power where you are, asserting your humanity, and refusing to be dismissed, overlooked, or erased. I no longer waited for my children to define me. I no longer waited for approval. I no longer waited for permission. I had reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my rules. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and red, casting long shadows through the facility, I walked through the courtyard with Harold and Mrs. Jennings. Residents waved from windows. Smiles met us in the hallways. I paused, taking a deep breath of crisp evening air, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face. This was my life. These were my rules. My dignity had been restored. My spirit was unbroken. I thought of my children one last time, not with anger, but with clarity. They had underestimated me. They had failed to see the strength I carried. But I had seen it. I had felt it. And I had acted on it. I whispered softly to myself, a mantra that had carried me through the darkest days. I am not a burden. I am alive. I am powerful. I am free. And in that moment, standing in a place that had once felt like a prison, I realized I had never truly been confined. The walls could not hold me. The routines could not bind me. The decisions of others could not erase me. I had reclaimed myself, and nothing would ever take that away. Weeks, months, years, it didn't matter. What mattered was the lesson I had learned and the proof I had lived. I had given everything to my family, and when they could no longer see my value, I gave it back to myself. The facility became a place of empowerment, not just for me, but for everyone willing to see themselves as more than a schedule, more than a routine, more than a number. I smiled quietly, remembering the woman I had been the day they told me I was a burden. She was gone. In her place was someone stronger, wiser, unbreakable. And in that strength, I found peace. I had reclaimed my life, on my terms, by my rules, forever. And that's the story of how I reclaimed my life. How I proved that no one, not my children, not the world, not anyone can decide my worth for me. If this story inspired you, reminded you of your own strength, or gave you hope that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, make sure you hit that subscribe button. I share stories of courage, survival, and everyday heroes just like this one, so you don't want to miss what's coming next. Thank you for watching, and remember, your life, your rules, always.